Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Batcave. It's Saturday, September 9th, 2023, and I was actually going to get out of the house today and go to a coffee shop and do some writing. It's going to be under 100 degrees for the first time in months. But then I get up today and I have some guy whose shall remain unnamed, just out of decency, who just does this super typical Calvinist thing, okay? It's just super typical Calvinist thing that I'm going to show you. This is what Calvinists do online. So I made a post about Augustine. And when I'm studying and researching stuff, I'm going to occasionally post stuff to my Facebook. And the things I post are literally just like, here's a summary of the thousands of pages I've sifted through today. Here's some facts I discovered. They're not aimed at anybody, but they are meant to be shared with certain people. And so one of the things that I've been learning in abundance as I study the roots of Augustinian teaching and Calvinism, when I studied at seminary, is that they are completely based in infant baptism. Calvinism is completely based in infant baptism, and this is one of the things my prof at Phoenix Seminary would mark me down for, saying it's a fallacious argument when Herman Bavinck flat out says it. Regeneration preceding faith, which is the entire basis of Calvinism, was coined by John Calvin as a means of supporting infant baptism while rejecting Catholic baptismal regeneration. Fact. Because what he is declaring is Augustine's own argument, which comes from his book on grace and free will, and he also uses it in his Predestination of the Saints, and he also uses it in his arguments for infant baptism, which is that if you can't be regenerated without believing, then infants can't be saved by infant baptism. That's the whole basis of Calvinism. That's 100% the basis of Calvinism. And the basis for irresistible grace and total depravity is Augustine's fight to not become a celibate priest when he came to faith in Christ. Not saying he wasn't saved. I'm saying he in his day, the church had banned you from being a Christian and teaching in secular forums once you got saved. Which means if you were trained as a teacher of logic or rhetoric, what they were doing is they were making rules that were forcing you to become a teacher in the church instead. And the church was basically becoming a competitive philosophical school to all the Greek and pagan philosophical schools that were around. And so for Augustine, to become a Christian was to have no job skills except to become a priest, and to become a priest was to become celibate. That was the law of the land in his day, if you were a Christian. And these people had the power to condemn you to hell. Okay? They had been teaching for over 100 years that you couldn't go to heaven without them. And Augustine was raised in that system. Okay? And so I write this thing, and I tell them that basically these are facts. These are things that Augustine actually taught. He taught that it was a sin to enjoy sex, even if you're married. He taught that sexual activity outside of trying to have a baby is a sin. He said if people have a marriage and they deliberately keep themselves from getting pregnant, that it's debauchery. So in other words, you and your wife can't have sex with a condom, or it is debauchery. You are committing sin. You're committing licentiousness, because you're only supposed to have sex to have kids. He literally taught that because of the fall of man, God created involuntary sexual arousal in order to cause men to have children, because they wouldn't want to obey him to be fruitful and multiply otherwise. Okay? He didn't design pleasure and sex on purpose. That wasn't God's original intent, but that was what he had to do because of the fall. This is what Augustine teaches, okay? You just go read his thoughts on, he writes whole treatises on celibacy and marriage, okay? And I'm going to walk you through his writings in a minute, chronologically, so you can see the logic of what I'm saying here. So then I said he basically his fight between celibacy and not being a Christian and actually having a woman, because he was sexually active for 15 years and had a son, was the basis of total depravity and irresistible grace. And then he gets into predestination later on. He already believed all this stuff as a Manichaean, okay? Which he was for 9 years before becoming a Christian. He became a Christian because Ambrose was like the most famous guy in the West, and he was the top rhetorical mind in the West. And Augustine was a rhetoric teacher. And he literally wanted to be Ambrose, and that's what led him from being a Manichae to being a Christian, okay? Again, I've read a lot of Augustine stuff, and I am not throwing him into the bus as not being saved, okay? I think he is saved. I just think he's deeply deceived by the cultural Christianity of his day. So basically, he had Pelagius condemned because Pelagius shows up in Rome, and Augustine's confession is being published in Rome, and Pelagius gets a copy of it and reads it, and he starts to critique it. Then Rome gets overrun by the Goths, and Pelagius moves to Carthage, where Augustine is the bishop. Now, Pelagius is a monk, and monks were the only people really outside of the office of the church or specific schools and academies that could teach. But typically those people in those academies were also elders in the churches. Monks were the only people who could not be ordained, who could have teaching influence. And what you're going to find frequently, over and over and over again, is you're going to find that these bishops who are trained in rhetoric and philosophy, because that's what they were doing before they became a Christian, and then it was outlawed for them to do that anymore, they're all becoming priests. And if you read the early church fathers, and I'm talking from the days of Cyprian and Paulus Samosata onward, you're going to read over and over and over again about these church fathers. He was trained in rhetoric. They were rich kids who went to upper class schools and were trained in rhetoric and philosophy. Rhetoric. And that's why you have so much bad argumentation and basically sophistry and horrible logic dominating the church for so many years. I mean, from then to the present. Because literally for hundreds of years, all your most prominent bishops, all your most prominent scholars were rhetoricians before they became Christians. And then they start schools and they teach rhetoric, which is literally about the art of persuasion, but it's not about logic. These guys are not good scholars of original Christianity, okay? And so Pelagius is going to see Augustine's writing and note the very obvious traces of Manichaeanism, because in his confession all over, he talks about his former life as a Manichae, okay? And then he's going to see the obvious problem Augustine has with celibacy reeking through his writing, because it's all over it. And he's going to account Paul's teaching about mandatory celibacy being a doctrine of demons. Now, Pelagius was probably celibate himself because he was a monk. But the monks, their schools came from a Stoic line of thought that was about voluntary self-control being a high virtue. The Catholics of his day are trying to force people to be celibate. In fact, at the Council of Nicaea, they missed by one vote, declaring that, by one guy who convinced them otherwise, declaring that all priests, pastors, deacons, elders, everybody had to be celibate. And if they were married, they could no longer have sex with their wives. One guy stopped that from passing at Nicaea 100 years before Augustine. And then they gave authority to all the archbishops who all believed this, saying that no elders or no clerical offices could be approved by them. So you literally had 5 guys, most of whom already believed this, who were deciding who over the next 100 years gets to be a priest. And even though it wasn't official canon law that celibacy was mandatory, it was club rule that in order to be a priest you had to be celibate. So Augustine is going to personify celibacy as if the celibacy was the Holy Spirit and call her Sweet Lady Continence, and talk about this war between Sweet Lady Continence and his lustful flesh that wants to do what normal human nature wants to do, which is get married and have kids, which is part of your original design, which is why it's God's original command. We're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. So it's not abnormal to want to have sex. Okay? But Augustine has a problem. So what he's going to do, and I'm going to show you this in order, he is going to weaponize infant baptism against Pelagius. Okay? Before he writes anything about predestination and free will, he's going to first start treatises on infant baptism because he knows Pelagius agrees with infant baptism. And that's Pelagius' downfall. And his argument is very simple. You're going to read it. You're going to find that argument at the end of this book on grace and free will, which is one of the things he writes later on during the Pelagian debate, okay? And it's full of stuff against Pelagius. And his final closing argumentation, which was his original proof, was that infant baptism doesn't work without people being saved against their will and people being predestined and people being saved without believing. That's his whole point, is that infant baptism is the ultimate proof. Because he knows everybody's been doing infant baptism since the days of Cyril, which is 100 years before him. And they were doing child baptism probably for decades before that, because Hippolytus, his apostles' teaching, actually explains doing child baptism for a child as young as 3 years old. And Tertullian spoke out against it probably like within 10 years before Hippolytus printed his apostolic teaching, or his apostolic tradition. Okay, so you have this, and it's very clear that infant baptism is driving this whole thing, and he knows everybody, including Pelagius, is on the infant baptist bandwagon, and I'm going to show you the order he does it. Okay, it's so important to understand the order of his writings, because he knows this is the exact same thing Cyril of Alexandria did to destroy Novatus. Okay. Novatus was basically saying that people who lapse, that is, deny Christ during persecution, cannot be forgiven by the Roman Catholic Church. And then other people who sided with Novatus, they weren't a monolithic sect of belief. Other people who sided with Novatus, who were called Novatians later, which were probably actually Montanus and other detractors of Cyril, these guys started teaching rebaptism. And what rebaptism was is basically saying, okay, Novatus is saying per Hebrews 6 that if you deny Christ during persecution, there's no repentance from you, okay? He was wrong in his interpretation. But other Novatianists were right in their interpretation, saying, oh, you were baptized as a child? Oh, you thought Christianity was a philosophy and converting was just changing philosophy schools? No, that's not Christianity. You need to be rebaptized and taught true Christianity, just like Paul rebaptized people who weren't taught true Christianity. Okay? And they rebaptized people, and they were called rebaptizers. And this is why the Calvinists, and the Augustinian Calvinists and Lutherans and Catholics all murdered Anabaptists. It's because they were calling them rebaptizers after the Novatianists. The Novatianists were pro-Nicaea. The Novatianists were okayed by Constantine, and then they started getting attacked after the Catholics got power in Alexandria and other places. Okay? They started getting attacked against imperial decree. But these same people were rebelling against the emperors as well. Okay? So these Novatianists are going to come up with rebaptism and saying you were never really saved, you need to be rebaptized. And what's going to happen is that Cyril is going to argue that anyone who rebaptizes you is basically anathema. Because Cyril is all about preserving his own power and the power of the Roman Catholic Church. He is a rhetorician. He was a baby Christian. He was a 3-year-old Christian when he became the bishop of the fourth most prominent see in the church, okay, which is Carthage. Okay? Literally, it's Rome, Carthage, Alexandria, and Antioch are the 4 most prominent, followed by probably Jerusalem and Caesarea. And this 3-year-old Christian who runs out of town as soon as he hears the persecution gets to the bishop's seat, which is basically de facto over all the bishops in the region, and people don't like that. So what's going to happen is he's going to accuse these rebaptizers, and he's going to start to push infant baptism hardcore, because he is teaching baptismal regeneration as efficacious in order to build up the power of the Roman Catholic Church and their authority over your soul. That's really what he's doing, okay? And Augustine's 100 years after this, and everybody is infant baptizing now, okay? And so in order to advance infant baptism and get rid of Pelagius. He gets Pelagius tricked into admitting into infant baptism and baptismal regeneration, and then he shreds him on that basis, saying that original sin is the means of requiring infant baptism, which is what the Catholics taught, and that his total depravity is proven. He literally is citing erections. I kid you not, in his writings, he's citing things like erections and impotence as proof of total depravity. Okay? He's an absurd man. Read his confession for yourself. He spends the last 30 pages. I give you 5 pages to cover his whole life, and he spends 30 pages arguing over which words God should have chosen instead of formless and void for formless and void. He literally spends 30 pages arguing this, okay? This is a Gnostic philosopher at their best. God couldn't have meant what he said. Let me correct God. I'm going to argue against all the other people who are trying to correct God and prove that I'm smarter than them. This is how Gnostic philosophers work, okay? He doesn't know he's a Gnostic philosopher, but he's 200 years deep in other Gnostic philosophers. You got to remember, Clement was an open Gnostic. Origen was a full-blown freaking Gnostic cult leader. I don't care what anyone says. He taught reincarnation and cut his nuts off and taught universalism. Okay? All the monks stem from Origen and Clement. Clement was the first one to cop to the perpetual virginity of Mary, which he gets out of the Gnostic Gospel of James. He cites it. And then these guys are going to start teaching that basically enjoying sex is wrong, and that it's just a necessary evil to perpetuate humanity. And then Origen's going to teach that we're all fallen angels, and it's building prisons for them. That's what procreation is. And then it's just a necessary evil to punish the wickedness of fallen angels. These guys are so demented in their thinking. They're not remotely Christian, okay? And so Augustine is going to build upon their stupid ideas, and he definitely reads Tertullian, and he definitely reads Clement, and he definitely reads Origen, okay? He definitely knows of these guys. They're maybe not Origen, but he's reading stuff that's influenced by Origen, and he's definitely reading Clement firsthand. He's reading his Stromata, which is the whole Gnostic thing. Just go look up. It's A&F Book 2, okay, Volume 2, and read Clement's Stromata. Just do a word search on the word Gnostic, and it's just openly Gnostic, the whole thing. And your so-called scholars are going to say that, oh, but he meant good Gnosticism. This is how dumb these people are. Oh, I've literally sat down with Catholics, and they're like, oh, but that's their God of heaven. Oh, but that's their Pontifex Maximus. They know full well that these are pagan terms, but they adopt them, and they say they baptize them. That's baptized Gnosticism. That's good Christian Gnosticism. No, it's not. It's Gnosticism. It's the same mixture of Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics that created every form of Gnosticism out there. It's just a version that you have more refined scholars who know more Bible and who are better able to synthesize it with the Bible to make it saleable to the dupes, which is the laity that the Catholics are teaching them how to dominate, and then they're teaching them how to illuminate them in Gnosticism. You literally have the Gnostics in the East, and in the West you have the superstitious Catholics who are making people afraid to death of everything in order to gain more power for themselves. And they're working hand in hand, and then the Catholics eventually win because the Gnostic Muslims take over everything that the Gnostic violent Easterners had been doing. Muhammad just shows up and does it better, except offers them sex while these people are demanding their celibacy. That's it. That's why Gnosticism took over the East. It's not because they were this overwhelming military force and nobody could stop them. The Christians were already rioting and rebelling against the emperors and pulling weight on the emperors all over the Eastern Empire. They were doing it in Antioch, they were doing it in Macedonia, they were doing it right in Constantinople. They were doing it all over Alexandria. The Bishop of Alexandria ran things 100 years before Muhammad pulled up. And then Muhammad and his boys just capitalized on that and got these same nominal Christians to go after a religion that actually doesn't have some stupid bishop lording over you who's probably gay and doesn't try to make you be celibate to be a teacher. So how many of these nominal Christians went over to that? Easy, by the millions they went over to that. And that's why Islam overran North Africa and Assyria and Palestine and all these within one generation. It wasn't because they were just like, oh wow, these guys in the desert with all their advanced resources in the desert, right? These guys don't even have trees to cut down to make battering rams. They're literally riding camels and they have bow and arrows and scimitars, and they're going up against massive walled cities. How are they winning? And the answer is because the people don't want to fight them. They're offering a better religion. If you're going for a nominal, fake, not born again religion, they're offering a better one. That's why they won. And guys like this were the reason why. They taught you that it was a sin to have sex, even if you're married. These fools, okay? So watch, this guy's going to comment again. He's going to get it. Look at. So this guy reads the stuff I put down here. Nothing's unfactual, and he says, this is a very skewed version of Augustine's theology, beginning with sex to shock the reader into a straw man case against Calvin and Luther in the process. Nothing I said against Calvin and Luther was not factual. Pelagius was bordering on antinomianism. No evident writings back that up. Nothing whatsoever. Go search the interwebs. I defy this man and anyone else to prove this, okay? Pelagius was bordering on antinomianism. No, he wasn't. He just taught that people have an unrestricted free will, okay? Which everyone in the East believed. Which Augustine forcefully resisted. They love to use these words. Forcefully resisted. He forcefully resisted his antinomianism. No, he didn't. He forcefully resisted his critiques of Augustine's confession. This is bullcrap. These people just lie. Please do not buy into this clearly biased Cliff Note version of Augustine, okay? Or thinly veiled support of Arminianism without doing your own research. Where did I support Arminianism? Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Okay? How very sad to sink to this level. This is what these douchebags do, okay? I'm calling them out by name. Thomas Lutke. This is what these douchebags do. They look at slander. Okay? Okay, so I said, okay, you must be a Calvinist. They're the only people I know who tell people they're wrong without giving evidence showing overwhelming ignorance of the subject matter. He's not going to read this. You use the word ignorance. That's mean. Watch where he goes. Watch where he goes after saying biased Cliff Note version, veiled support of Arminian, sad, just condescending, snide, slanderous remarks. Okay? Watch where he goes. So you must be a Calvinist. And I said, I just went, I should have said, I just went through the 5 volumes of Philip Schaff's NFPF, literally thousands of pages of reading. Literally thousands of pages of reading. Literally, like, I've been in a cave for the past year researching, okay? Read this, said, here, this is blah, 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 garbage, false doctrine. Prove anything you said or stand as a liar and a false accuser. What's he going to do? I'm not going to, listen to this. I'm not going to engage in protracted online doctrinal argument, which is the nifty tool of the evil one to divide Christians in a day when much bigger issues are pertinent. AKA, I'm just going to slander you and walk away. And if you call me out for not posting any evidence next to my slander, I'm going to tell you that you're being divisive. This is what Calvinists do. This is what Calvinist liars do. And so I tell them again, okay, yep. Just make slanderous accusations and run away like every Calvinist who has ever engaged with any equipped apologist online. How is he going to respond? Sad tear. I'm just all for unity in the body of Christ, and you're making me cry now with your divisiveness. Let me tell you what I said that made him cry with sad cry emoji. Okay? This is it. I said, no, just make slanderous accusations and run away like every Calvinist who has ever engaged with any equipped apologist online, okay? I read Augustine in seminary. This is literally his rebuttal. I read Augustine in seminary. I don't care. You're going to cite anything Augustine said as proving anything I said false? No, I'm just going to say, I read Augustine in seminary. I went to seminary. See, that shuts down most Christians, because most Christians haven't gone to seminary. You don't need to go to seminary. You need to know that everything the seminaries are going to convince you that they have exclusive access to is available for free online. In fact, you can just literally go through the free Christian ethereal library and chat GPT for all your translation needs and do it yourself. You don't need seminary, okay? These liars are trying to convince you that these lying propagandists with their degree mill PhDs tell you what to think. And they're smart and you're not. This is the same thing the Gnostics did in the days of Clement and Origen. Okay? This is how they roped in all these people into celibacy in the first place. I read Augustine in seminary. It doesn't demonstrate anything that you falsely accuse as being true, you liar. I called him out in Jesus' name. I said, you're going to be judged by God as a liar. I said, this is what I told him. I said, you're going to get caught in situations where nobody will listen to you, nobody will listen to reason, and it's going to be God. And this post is going to be ringing in your ear because I said, either back up what you're saying with evidence or apologize for slander. Don't engage with these Calvinists. Do not play their game. Call them out as lying slanderers. If they make their little snide comments and stuff like that, say, prove that what I'm saying is wrong or apologize for lying. You need to call them liars. You need to call them out as liars because they're infiltrating, taking over, and destroying churches all over this country. You need to call them out, okay? I said, you were given tailored snippets of Augustine seminary, then drowned in volumes of writings so that you could not interact critically with them. That's how they keep propaganda flowing, and their fourth-rate Gnostic PhDs sell thousands of dollars of classes to their dupes, okay? I just explained to him my educational background, and I said, he said, oh, there's bigger pertinent issues. I said, ignorant or liar, you can pick which one, okay? He's calling me out for using the word ignorant, okay? For using the word ignorant and saying what you're saying is ignorant, okay? You're immoral because you used the word ignorance. But you're not immoral for using the word second rate, cliff note, straw man, sad, as if you have any basis for the things you're saying. But my final rebuttal is so sad. This is the final condescension of the Calvinists. I'm morally superior. I can't prove why, but I'm just at no time stop condescending. That is what they do. Never stop condescending. Thomas Lutke, I'm posting this video online. Thomas Lutke, this one is for you. Never stop condescending, even though you know you're wrong and the whole world knows you're wrong. This is your rhetorical tactic. Why? Because all of these people are rhetoricians. They are not logicians, they're rhetoricians. If they're logicians, they would know that the reason that they have to punt to mystery is because they don't have a reason. Okay? Again, somebody make a short out of this. Okay? Listen. When the Bible uses the term mystery, it's because it's explaining something. When Catholics, Calvinists, and Orthodox use the word mystery, it's to avoid explaining something. Don't fall for that trick. Punting to mystery is a way of saying, I don't know, but believe me. Don't fall for that trick. Somebody make a short out of this, please. Now, you can Google for yourself. Don't believe me. Augustine's writings in chronological order. You can read them all, okay? There's literally 4 volumes dedicated to Augustine on Philip Schaff, and that's not even all his stuff that's out there online for free, okay? You have NFPF, that is NPNF, that's Nicene Post-Nicene Fathers, it's set 1, volume 1 through 5 are all Augustine, okay? There's literally probably somewhere in the ballpark of 7,000 to 8,000 pages of Augustine, okay? It's all, don't worry, it's all broken down by chapter, and these chapters list their subjects. You could literally go through and understand all the subject listings in about an hour or two, okay? Then you can word search the subjects for Bible proof text to prove where they're mishandling the verses. Then you can word search them for Catholic language and Orthodox language that are used consistently, so you can find those subjects and what they say about those subjects. You don't have to read it all. You just have to know how to search it. You just have to use Control F and know key terms. So if I want to find out if Augustine read Clement, I am going to just word search on the name Clement. And what I'm going to find out is I need to distinguish between the introductory notes by these Reformed Calvinists and where Augustine actually mentions Clement. And then I find out where he mentions Clement. I can read their footnotes where they say he mentions Clement, and then I can read him firsthand and see where they mention Clement. And there's 8 usages of it in this volume. That's how I'm doing my research, okay? And I can read what he says about Clement, and I can know firsthand what he's interacting with from Clement. I can know what he's interacting with from Tertullian, because I can put in Tertullian. And the same thing, I'm going to get all their notes on where he mentions Tertullian, and then I'm going to get where he mentions Tertullian by name in his writings, okay? 26 mentions of the word Tertullian, okay? This is what I'm doing, because I read Clement and I read Tertullian before this. So I know what they got wrong, and then I go to Augustine and I know what he's building on. This is how I'm writing my rightly dividing book, okay? It's not just taking sound bites. It's not taking cliff notes. It's doing deep dive research after thousands and thousands of pages of reading literally everything. Maybe not every word of Clement, but almost everything that happened up to Clement. I've read it all. And I've had other people reading it with me to help me out, to make sure I'm not missing stuff. Okay? That's what I'm doing here. I'm proving to everybody why crap was built on top of other crap. It's a crap sandwich. It's a COD. Go watch The Big Short. Like this is these are CDOs. This is church history. It's just crap wrapped in crap, shoved in bacon and wrapped in more crap. It's all it is. It's just bad doctrine on top of bad doctrine on top of bad doctrine on top of bad polity on top of bad polity on top of bad polity. And the swindlers and the rhetoricians are ruling a roost. And by this day, I promise you plenty of them are gay. I promise you this. You just have to understand human nature and incentives and you'll know plenty of them are gay. Okay? But if you want to hold up your mythological version of Christianity, Mr. Sad, Crying Face, Thomas Lutke, who thinks theological triage and getting everybody to implicitly endorse Calvinism through stealth and lies is the way to save the church, you are deceived. The way to save the church is to get people to understand how it got off track, not to attack the people who are doing that work. You liar. You enemy of Christ. So, Augustine's writings in chronological order. There are multiple sources. You can compare them, but they're all basically going to say the same thing. Augustine is going to come out. He's going to get saved this year and immediately start writing treatises. This is how vain he is. Okay? He's a rhetoric teacher, but he's going to start writing apologetic treatises, multiple of them. Look at this, 4 of them. The year he gets saved. Now, I'm sorry, but I've been saved for 23 years. I didn't start claiming to know anything to the point of publication until I was a 20-year-old Christian and then led dozens of people to the Lord, had discipled dozens of people, and gone through plenty of my own battles with my own sin and with false churches and with lying, deceiving Calvinists and all kinds of stuff like that before I got to the point where I'm going to publish. And the first thing I published had nothing to do with this. It was on the book of Revelation because nobody was doing it right. Now I'm publishing a church history because nobody's doing it right. Nobody's giving you an honest, critical look at how the church got off track and got torn into 1,000 pieces. Nobody is giving you an honest, critical look at it. They're all standing on the propaganda in the past and saying sometime after this they got off track, and not realizing got off track with Ignatius 10 years after John the Apostle died. It got off track when they didn't have a council to pull together what the real Bible was immediately after John the Apostle died. That's where it got off track. Okay? So anyways, he's going to write against the academics because he is, remember, he's a Christian now, so he can't be an academic anymore. So he's going to attack the academics. He's going to write on order and the immortality of the soul and start putting together his ideas about the human soul, okay, which a lot of the stuff's going to be based on. He is going to interact with Tertullian, and he is going to criticize Tertullian, and just he's a baby Christian, and he's already starting to shred Tertullian. He's literally calling him like the ravings of Tertullian and stuff like this, okay? Tertullian had some things wrong, but Tertullian could wipe the floor with Augustine. in terms of his integrity and in terms of his quality as a teacher. Okay? Tertullian was brilliant. He came out of a legal profession not because he had to, he chose to, and started teaching in the church. Okay? He's leaps and bounds better than Augustine. Does he get some stuff wrong? Yes, he does. Is he too rigorous on the side of the Montanist? Yes, he is. But he's one of the only people in his day speaking out against the baptism of children, 3-year-olds who can't confess. And if people had listened to him, we wouldn't have had the lapsarian controversy. We wouldn't have had infant baptism. We wouldn't have had priestly celibacy and all this crap. Okay? We wouldn't have had, because the Montanists that he was down with taught orderly use of the spiritual gifts in churches, orderly use. A woman who had a prophecy had to write it down and give it to an elder. She couldn't just shout out in the congregation. Okay? They taught that you can't deny Christ during persecution, or you're just done. You are never saved. And the only things they get wrong is that they forbid remarriage after you're a widow or divorced, and then they, which the Bible forbids remarriage if you're divorced from a Christian. And then he teaches that penance that is basically too hardcore. Like they make you like beg for forgiveness if you've fallen into sin. And he teaches that you can lose your salvation, which came from the shepherd Hermas. It didn't come from him. Everybody believed that. Okay, Tertullian could wipe the floor with Augustine. But anyways, Augustine's then going to write, his dialectic. He's going to write all his. This is philosophical work. Okay. And then this is his philosophic and his soul work. This is all holdover from Greek philosophy, all of this, okay? Then he's going to say on the morals of the Catholic Church and on the morals of the Manichaeans. See, he came out of Manichaeanism, and he has to prove himself by shredding Manichaeanism now, okay? And he's getting this from Ambrose, and he's trying to be Ambrose. And so he's copying Ambrose's style, only he's writing and publishing, and Ambrose is mostly just speaking this stuff, okay? And so then he's going to start, I got to have an opinion on music, because he has to have an opinion on everything, because Ambrose did. Okay? He's literally just, he is published. Think of Plato to Socrates, okay? Ambrose is Socrates, and he's Plato. He's literally just mimicking Ambrose, but publishing every thought he has. Okay? So then he's going to talk about on the teacher, on the choice of the free will. This is when he's going to start to get into his fatalism, okay? On the free choice of the will, okay? Does that sound like free will? Yes, he does believe in free will. He never stops believing in free will. Don't let people tell you that. What he does is he just comes up with a compatibilistic free will by the end, okay? Now this is before he writes his confessions, but the Manichaeans are against free will. And so he's writing for free will because he's writing against the Manichaeans. On the profit of believing, on two souls against the Manichaeans, okay? Acts of disputation of Fortunatus of the Manichaeans. Fortunatus is a Manichaean that he would engage with, okay? And he's going to start to write in the Psalms. Why? Because Ambrose did, okay? Then on faith in the creed. Why? Because you have to establish Christianity for the first time like it all started with you, because that's what all these famous giants of the faith felt the need to do, okay? Then he's going to write on Genesis. And he's going to start shredding the literal idea of Genesis. Why? Because he's being influenced by Clement and Origen. Okay? Then he's going to write some more stuff, more moral stuff. He can keep going against the Manichaeans. You keep going on Christian doctrines. And then in the year 400, 14 years after he gets saved, he publishes his Confessions. Okay, it's between 397 and 400, so between 10 and 14 years after he gets saved, he publishes his Confessions, and he talks about how he got saved. He talks about, basically, he accredits his salvation to the prayers of his mother, and this is where you get the false teaching that's floating around the churches, that if you're saved, it's because someone was praying for you. That's BS. Nobody is responsible for your salvation but you. Okay? Nobody's going to be responsible for you going to hell but you. Nobody is predestined. This is his original version of predestination and election to salvation. My mom was a saint, and she was so holy that she prayed to God for me to get saved, and therefore God had to answer her prayers, and because they were in the will of God, and that's how I had to get saved. Do you think every parent doesn't want every one of their kids to get saved? On this basis, you would say that all children of Christians must get saved eventually. And that's basically what the Europeans are going to buy into. That they're all basically Christians. Why? Because their parents are Christians and it's all predestined. And that's how predestination is worked out. And it's going to become a racist system. Because after the Muslims take over all the brown people in the church, and they do, all the white people in the church are going to say, we're all elect and predestined, and we all happen to be white, therefore the whites are predestined to rule over the brown people. That's what they're going to do. So he's going to keep going against the Manichaeans, and over these next few years, he's going to keep, writing against the literal meaning of Genesis. Then he's going to start attacking the Donatists. He's always looking for somebody to attack, okay? Because Ambrose is famous, and Ambrose is speaking against the Arians and the Novatianists. And so he's like, oh, I want to be the next Ambrose. So he needs to find people to speak against in order to make himself famous. So what he's going to do is he's going to look for targets. And he starts with the Manichaeans, then he shifts to the Donatists, who are basically just neo-Novatianists. Okay, they're just a little more extreme Novatianists. Okay, because the Novatianists have only been around for 150 years, and they're not gone. They're all over the empire at this time. Okay. So he's going to start going against that, and then because of the Donatists, listen to this, because of the Donatists, remember, Cyril answered the Novatianists by promoting infant baptism and baptismal regeneration, and he is the successor of Cyril in his day, okay? Cyril succeeded Tertullian as the top mind of Carthage, and now he's succeeding Cyril. And so he's going to do the exact same thing that Cyril did, and he's going to talk about baptismal regeneration, hardcore. Now, mind you, he's already published a belief that believes in irresistible grace and predestination. He's not using that terminology, but that's what he's basically copped to in his confession. Now he's talking about baptismal regeneration and infant baptism, okay? And then after that, he's going to publish his City of God. And it's in his City of God that he's going to write chapters because he's already been teaching against sexuality, and he's popular in Rome by this time. And the Romans had been sacked by the Goths about 2 years before this, and people are so deceived by him and the Catholics because of this Clementine celibacy stuff that they're literally people who were raped in Rome who are wondering if they've committed a mortal sin because they weren't married and they had sex. This is how superstitious these people are. And he writes to them and says, don't worry, as long as you just didn't enjoy it, then you didn't commit a mortal sin. They're already talking in terms of mortal and venial sins by this time. He's going to keep going. He's going to start to get more into election and predestination type stuff. And then by around this time, he is going to interact with Pelagius. Okay? Now you can get Nicene, post-Nicene Fathers, and there's a whole volume just dedicated to stuff that he writes against Pelagius. Okay? And you can go to the first one that he has is the treatise on the merits of the forgiveness of sin and the baptism of infants. That's the first one of the anti-Pelagian writings, is on the baptism of infants. Why? Pelagius is going to critique his writing somewhere probably within a year. He's going to get a copy of it within a year or so of him producing it because he's in Rome and Augustine's popular in Rome. Okay? And so Pelagius is going to critique it, and you can tell by letters that Augustine writes what Pelagius is saying about him, because he's rebutting this stuff in his letters. One of the things he's rebutting is against Paul's doctrines of demon statement. He's talking about forced celibacy. Okay, he's going to call out stuff as being Manichaean. And what Augustine is going to say is, because I'm a Catholic and I'm condemning him as a heretic, he's calling all of us Manichaeans rather than just calling himself a Manichaean. And what Augustine is going to keep doing is saying, I teach the Catholic faith, I teach what we all believe. Okay? And he's going to keep pushing forward, and the baptism of infants is going to be central to his argumentation the entire time. Okay? He's going to keep going on the nature of grace, the Spirit, and the letter. He's going to basically talk about his Gnostic understanding and how he's a better interpreter of things, and he's going to quote tons of passages out of context. Just read this one little book. It's like 100 pages. He literally, I have them all highlighted. dozens of scriptures that he pulls out of context to make his case, and they're all the same one that the Catholics or that the Calvinists use. They all get them from Augustine. Okay. Then he's going to write treatise on grace and original sin. Grace and original sin. Then on marriage and concupiscence, because he's defending celibacy, okay? And then on the soul again, and he's going to talk about how the soul is corrupt because you inherited your soul from Adam. Your soul, not your body, your soul. Your soul is inherited from Adam. Never mind that Ezekiel 8:18 is God himself saying, all souls are mine. And a son won't be punished for the sin. A son's soul is not punished for the sins of his father. His body is punished for the sins of his father, not his soul. Read Ezekiel 18 and read who's talking. God is more authoritative than Calvin or Tertullian or Augustine. Okay? Then he's going to write against the Pelagians. He's going to continue on grace and free will. That's this writing. Okay? This stuff is crystallizing at this point. And if you know when this stuff is writing, on the grace of Christ and original sin, this is when he gets Augustine condemned at the Council of Carthage. They try to get him to, one of his followers, Paulus Orosius, the same guy who falsely equated Ninus and Semiramis to Nimrod in Semiramis, the same guy who did that is going to be friends with Jerome, and Jerome is talking to Pelagius in Jerusalem and trying to get people to see his side of things, because in the East they believe in free will, and Augustine's clearly coming against free will. And he's going to write this on the proceedings of Pelagius. Because why? Because Pelagius actually went to a council in Jerusalem, I believe it was 413, and he gets acquitted. They don't think he's doing anything heretical. He's asserting and agreeing with everything that we believe, and he's saying some stuff that is more leaning into free will, and you're saying some stuff that's leaning more into determinism, and it sounds like a Latin dispute between a bunch of Latin-speaking people, so we're not going to condemn him. Augustine's not happy with that, so he calls together another council at Carthage to get him condemned on his home turf, and he gets him condemned. Of course, Pelagius is going to die at this time. He's going to die like a few months after he's condemned as a heretic. He wasn't really doing anything wrong. He didn't really have a major dog in this fight. He just read a book that wasn't that good and he critiqued it. Okay? He's not trying to start a cult of Pelagians. He's not trying to start a heretical sect of any real thing. He's just asserting the same free-willed based salvation that the entire East taught. And really, in the West, nobody refuted either. He's inventing the anti-free will salvation program for the first time. Nobody's teaching it before him. In fact, if you want to trace it down to its roots, I always forget this guy's name. If you want to trace it down to its roots, the predestination of election of people who get specially infused with divine knowledge that allows them to be saved, but some people don't, comes from this guy, Basilides, who taught from 117 to 138. He was one of the earliest Gnostics. It didn't come from the Manichaeans. The Manichaeans are just regurgitating. The Manichaeans are like one of the last Gnostic sects to emerge. And all they're doing is regurgitating and synthesizing the Gnosticism before them, just like the Greek philosophers would regurgitate and synthesize the philosophy before them. And just like the Christian church is regurgitating and synthesizing the theology before them. And then they're going to split over the same bad arguments. Every single group's going to do this. The Gnostics are going to do this. The philosophers are going to do this. And the Christians are going to do this. It's the exact same thing, because they're all mixing the same false presuppositions that came from Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics. By this time, those are the main ones. And they all somewhat can flow together, but they all have the same wrong presuppositions in them. And those are going to lead to divided arguments over the wrong presuppositions that they're all rooted in. Okay? And Basilides is going to teach. He was a pupil of Simonian, the teacher of Menander. Okay, He was a pupil of either Simonian or Menander, okay? So Simonian is literally Simon Magus. This is the first ever Gnostic. This is the guy that Peter rebukes to his face, okay? He has a student named Menander, and they're saying Basilides was either a second generation Gnostic or a third generation Gnostic, okay, from the original Gnostic stream, okay? And he is going to come up with the idea. Remember, these guys are all merging Platonic philosophy and this idea of God being an ideal perfect being and being impassible and all this stuff. And there's two versions of God's impassibility. One is going to be a monad, where he's just impassibly merciful, and that's going to eventually lead to either annihilationism or universalism. That's where that comes from. And the other is going to be he's an impassible duad, which means he's both wrath and love, and this is what the Calvinists teach, and that he's both of those things equally at the same time, and therefore he must have objects of wrath and objects of mercy in order to display his nature. You are not causing him to act mercifully towards you, because you can't cause God to do anything because he's impassible. He is just predeterminate to show off his wrath and his love through objects of wrath and objects of love. And that's why the Calvinist translations will literally change the Bible from vessels of wrath to objects of wrath. Because if you fill up the measure of your sin, you become a vessel of wrath. You become a vessel fit for destruction. If you fill up the measure of your sin, you become a vessel fit for destruction. It's an if, because God is not impassible. You cause him to get angry by your repeated sin. That is the idea that you can't cause God to get angry does not come from the Bible. God is a jealous God. You can cause him to get jealous. He's jealous by nature, but you cause him to get jealous. You cause him to get angry. He's not angry by nature. He's jealous. He says he's jealous. That's an emotion. God's an emotional guy. It's okay. He made us, and we're emotional guys. It's okay to be emotional. It's okay to not do fake, sad tears as a way of showing that you're impassibly indifferent and you're just too mature, but you're crying, you're weeping for the church for this divisiveness with your insincere, fake alligator tears. Bullcrap. Call them bullcrap. Okay? So, Basilides comes up with this idea, because again, he's looking at the duad instead of the monad, because these guys early on were at least honest about what they were reading and imbibing, and the guys later on are pretending that they're getting it from the Bible instead of from the Greek philosophy. Okay? And these guys, he says, they are Gnostic elect, who are basically elect, and they're infused with, right here, like other Gnostics, Basilides taught that salvation comes through knowledge and not faith. Okay? Faith is when God reveals something to you and you choose whether or not to believe it. Okay? That's what faith is. The Gnosticism is where you have secret mystery knowledge, and by the attunement to that secret mystery knowledge, you save yourself. Okay? This knowledge or gnosis was considered esoteric, a revelation to human beings of the divine being. Okay? Esoteric knowledge is literally what Calvinistic election is. Faith played no part in salvation. This is literally what Augustine and Calvin teach in the case of the baptism and salvation of infants. Faith plays no part in salvation. Okay? And they're eventually going to teach it to the people who say regeneration precedes faith. Because regeneration is literally salvation. And if it precedes faith, then faith plays no part in salvation. This is what the Gnostics believed. Basilides believed faith was merely an assent of the soul to any of the things which do excite sensation because they are not present. Okay? It's an assent. Faith is a mental assent to those who have the gnosis. Okay? AKA, it's what the regenerate believe after they're regenerate. Okay? He also believed that faith was a matter of nature, not of conscious choice, so that men would discover doctrines without demonstration of an intellective apprehension. AKA, you are either born predetermined by nature to believe, to get the gnosis, or you're not. Basilides also appears to have accumulated forms of dignity in accordance with one's faith, okay? AKA progressive sanctification and differing rewards, okay? Because Basilides believed faith was a matter of nature, doubtlessly he pushed election so far as to sever a portion of mankind for the rest, exactly what Calvin and Augustine do, as alone entitled by divine decree. This is exactly what Calvinists do. This isn't Clement Stromata. This is where this is coming from, okay? To receive a higher enlightenment In this sense, it must have been called the elect stranger to the world as being super mundane, okay? So, in case you think I'm just reading stuff off of Wikipedia and not thinking, this guy gets critiqued in Clement Stromata. This is book 4, chapter 26, okay? So let's go right to Clement Stromata, book Basilides. This is what he says. Now, followers of Basilides regard faith as natural, for they also refer it to choice, representing as finding ideas by intellectual comprehension without demonstration, while the followers of Valentinius assign faith to us, the simple, but will have it knowledge springing up from their own selves, okay? So he's saying the Valentinian Gnostics, this is a new stream of Gnosticism, differ from the Basilides Gnostics, and they say they regard faith as a matter of nature, okay? As they also refer it to choice, as they find ideas by intellectual comprehension without demonstration, okay? This is where he's getting this from. Accordingly, the followers of Basilides define faith to be the assent of the soul to any of those things that do not affect the senses, though not being present. So, okay, it's just a mental assent, okay? Clement is going to argue that Basilides does away with providence, and what providence is to everybody else is God's foreknowledge. That's what providence is. It literally means foreknowledge, okay? So remember, for those God foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of Christ. Now, foreknowledge is going to mean different things to different people, and some are going to interpret it as foreknowledge from an eternity past because they believe in an eternity past because they have the mistranslated Septuagint that says that wisdom was created in eternity, and they're going to believe Jesus was created in the eternity past, okay? There's no such thing as eternity past. There's no such thing as eternity past. There's no such thing as eternity past, okay? The real biblical foreknowledge is based in time. Foreknowledge is going to be time. God has knowledge of a person and how they respond to faith stimuli before he sends them the gospel. Okay? He knows who's walking in integrity. He knows who is obeying their conscience. And those people he intends to receive Christ. And people who just do what they want and suppress their conscience, they're not going to. Which is what he says in Romans 1. He makes abundantly clear. Okay? He said, those who strive to do good will inherit eternal life. Those who strive after wickedness will inherit hell. Okay? So yes, it's not what you do, but it is what you try to do. And Paul in Romans 7 is talking about an unregenerate person who's trying to do the right thing but can't, and God gives them the help to do the right thing. That's the gospel, okay? Calvinism is not the gospel. It's a false gospel. So he's gonna treat Basilides, which is the real root. Remember, Augustine is getting his ideas from Tertullian and Clement, okay? Clement is treating Basilides, and he is basically taking Clement's inconsistencies and straightening them out to their logical conclusion, which he ends up with dualistic fatalism. It's dualistic fatalism. God is a duad, and so therefore he's both always angry and always merciful. And because God can't be always angry and always merciful at one person at the same time, he needs to have different people elected for objects of wrath and objects of mercy, so he can display both of his natural characteristics on his creation, naturally, fatalistically, because you're not just fatalistically determined. In all Greek theological systems, God is fatalistically determined. Because in all Greek philosophies, which Greek theology is based in, God is fatalistically determined. He is, why he is, how he is, doing what he's doing out of necessity. He just does it. That's his nature, that's what he does. We don't know why. We don't think in terms of God's motives. We don't know. We just know what he does, and we know what his nature is, and they invent this idea called impassibility, which means perfect and unchanging, and unemotional, and not able to suffer. That's immutability and impassibility. And they come out of those doctrines to determine what God must be like, because he can't cause to be or do anything by us, based on their Greek philosophical notion of God. And Augustine is taking that forward, and he is going to say, oh, that means God has to be both wrath all the time and mercy all the time. And I have talked to dozens of Calvinists. When you tell them that you're wrong about God not dying for every man's sins because God is love, they're going to say God is also wrath. Now the scripture says that God is love, and the scripture says that God is jealous. What it doesn't say anywhere is that God is wrath. Wrath is an emotion that God has. In fact, wrath is a force that God exhibits according to the emotion of jealousy. That's simple. It's very simple. He is emotionally jealous by nature. Which means if you go worship some other god, look at a jealous husband is always jealous. And so if he sees his wife talking to anybody, he's going to have an emotional reaction to that. He's always jealous, but emotion reacts emotionally. That's what he's like. That's his nature. God is a jealous nature, and jealousy is an emotional assertion. You're talking to my wife? How about I punch you in the face? You're going worshiping other gods? How about I punch you in the face? That's what a jealous God does. He's not having, you're not changing his nature. You're provoking his nature. That's why he says they provoke me to wrath. They provoke me to jealousy. So he says, well, we're going to provoke the Jews to jealousy. Why? So they can understand that their God is a jealous God. That's why. But you got guys like Luke. The force is strong with you, Luke. I got the last word. Nope. Fail. Epic fail, Luke. Calvinism is evil. It's evil. It's manipulation. The nicest Calvinists I know are still manipulative people. They're nice manipulative people, but they're manipulative people. You know why? Because their God's a manipulative person. That's why. They don't process emotions like normal people. You know why? Because their God doesn't process emotions like a normal person. They harden themselves against feeling empathy for certain people. You know why? Because their God hardens himself against feeling empathy for certain people. They're racist. Do you know why? Because their God is racist. He chooses some families and elects them down their generations for salvation, and others he elects for destruction, even though that's what the opposite of what God's saying about the Jews all through the prophets. That's why all of our racist stuff comes from August. All of our racist and slave history comes from Augustinian Catholics and Calvinists. Not so much the Lutherans, but the Catholics and the Calvinists were the ones who perpetuated slavery for the most part. And that's why you have guys like Phil Johnson, who is promoting Christian nationalism.
Steve Lawson.
That's why you're going to find Phil Johnson's church up in Moscow, Idaho, giving sermons on slavery. They're not saying how slavery is wrong. So what's the point of all this? The point of all this is this. Augustine was definitely a Gnostic. Listen, these ideas didn't originate with him. They originated with men who are adopting the same wrong philosophical premises as him. Okay? He's just taking the wrong philosophical premises to their logical conclusion, and it just so happens, because of his Manichaean training, he is logically equipped to do that well. And what he ends up with, at the end of his life, he's going to teach on the predestination of saints and the gift of perseverance. And he is going to argue, this is what he argues, that real Christians will persevere, and those who fall away were always predestined to do so. And that's what Calvinism is going to talk about, effervescent grace. Okay? He's going to invent things like prevenient grace and ideas of God seeming like he regenerated you, but he actually didn't. Okay? This is where he writes on grace and free will. This is one of his later writings. Do you want to know how I know I'm not nitpicking Calvinism or nitpicking Augustine? Because he wrote this 6 years before he died. And if you go to this book has like 45 chapters. And in the 44th chapter, and 46 chapters, he calls gratuitous grace exemplified in infants. And he's going to walk through how infant baptism proves grace for people who don't believe in irresistible grace by how the little babies struggle in the baptismal. Okay? If you don't know this and you claim to have read a lot of Augustine in seminary, you're just an outright liar. You've been brainwashed and you don't want to think. If you don't want to think, that's your problem, but stay the frick off of my tabs. Stay the frick off of my comments. I'm not writing to you. I'm not writing to Calvinist sycophants. I'm writing to the Baptists who are smart enough to read and think and get rid of you people from their churches before they destroy it. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.